January 30th, 1990. A quiet Sunday morning in Beirut's Christian heartland. Danny Chamoun, leader of the Tigers militia, is having breakfast with his wife Ingrid and their two young sons, 5-year-old Tarek and 7-year-old Julian. At 7:30 a.m., 15 masked gunmen storm into their villa in the Babda Hills. They methodically execute the entire family. Danny's wife tries to shield the children. It doesn't matter. Even the family dog is shot. The killers leave behind a calling card. This is the handiwork of the Lebanese forces, eliminating the last rival Christian militia. By evening, the Tigers ceased to exist as an organization. This wasn't Muslims fighting Christians or Palestinians fighting Israelis. This was Lebanese Christians slaughtering each other's families while Syria tightened its grip on what remained of Lebanon. As if 15 years of civil war hadn't been tragic enough, the Maronite community was now tearing itself apart. Two generals, Michel Aoun and Samir Geagea, would lead their people into the most heartbreaking chapter of all, brother killing brother, while their homeland disappeared beneath their feet. The Chamoun massacre wasn't random violence, it was the final act of what Lebanese Christians called Harb al-Ilga, the Elimination War. For 5 years, the Lebanese forces had systematically destroyed every rival Christian militia, absorbing their fighters and seizing their territory. It began in 1985, when Bashir Gemayel's successors decided that Christian survival required unity under a single command. But their methods were brutal. The Geagea Liberation Army of Tony Frangier had been crushed in 1978 after the Aden massacre. The National Liberal Party of Camille Chamoun was neutered by 1980. One by one, every Christian faction bent the knee or faced annihilation. We had no choice, a former Lebanese forces commander would later explain. The Muslims were united under Syria. The Palestinians were armed by half the Arab world. We Christians were fighting each other, while our enemies watched and waited. Samir Geagea emerged as the architect of this consolidation. A former medical student turned militia commander, Geagea had learned war in the caves of Mount Lebanon. He was methodical, ruthless, and utterly convinced that Christian survival depended on eliminating internal divisions. By 1987, the Lebanese forces controlled virtually all of Christian Lebanon, East Beirut, Mount Lebanon, parts of the north. They ran their own ports, collected their own taxes, maintained their own army. In effect, they had created a Christian mini-state. But there was one institution they couldn't absorb, the Lebanese army, and commanding its remaining Christian units was General Michel Aoun. When we left off in episode 12, Lebanon was supposedly at peace. The Taif Agreement had been signed in October 1989, ending the civil war on paper. A new president, René Moawad, had been elected. But on November 22nd, Moawad was assassinated just 17 days into his presidency. In the chaos that followed, one man refused to accept Lebanon's submission to Syria. General Michel Aoun, commanding the last remnants of the Lebanese army from the presidential palace in Ba'abda, declared that any agreement signed under Syrian guns was illegitimate. "I am the legal government of Lebanon," Aoun announced on radio. "These politicians meeting in Syrian-occupied territories represent no one but Assad's puppets." Aoun wasn't just another warlord. Unlike the militia leaders who fought for sectarian advantage, he spoke of Lebanese nationalism that transcended religious divisions. "I don't care if you're Christian, Muslim, or Druze," he would tell audiences. "If you're Lebanese, you're my brother." But Aoun had a problem. His army, perhaps 25,000 loyal troops, controlled only East Beirut and some Christian areas. To survive, he needed allies. The obvious choice was Samir Geagea's Lebanese forces, who controlled the Christian heartland. The alliance was doomed from the start. Aoun believed in a centralized Lebanese state where the army controlled everything. Geagea had spent years building the Lebanese forces into an autonomous power that answered to no one. They were competing visions of Christian leadership. "Aoun thinks he can order us around like we're his soldiers," Geagea complained to his commanders. "But we fought this war while he was sitting in his office." For his part, Aoun saw Geagea as just another militia thug who had turned war into a profitable business. "They control the ports, they collect the taxes, they run their own little kingdom," Aoun said in a 1989 interview. "This isn't resistance, it's gangsterism." The tension exploded on February 14, 1989. Aoun ordered his troops to attack Lebanese forces' positions in East Beirut, claiming he was reasserting state authority. The battle lasted 3 days, leaving 80 dead and splitting the Christian enclave in two. On March 14, 1989, General Aoun declared his war of liberation against Syria. It was the last act of Lebanese defiance against foreign occupation, and it was spectacular in its futility. From his bunker beneath Bayabda Palace, Aoun commanded his artillery to shell Syrian positions across Lebanon. "Every Syrian soldier on Lebanese soil is an invader," he announced on radio. "We will drive them out or die trying." The Syrian response was devastating. Within hours, Syrian batteries in the mountains were pounding East Beirut with a ferocity not seen since the Israeli siege 7 years earlier. The bombardment was so intense that foreign diplomats compared it to the London Blitz. Lebanese civilians huddled in basement shelters as shells fell every few minutes. "We had survived Palestinians, Israelis, militias, everyone," recalls Maroun Baghdadi, a resident of Ashrafia. "But this was different. Assad wanted to break our spirit completely." International efforts to stop the bombardment failed. The Arab League sent mediators. The Vatican pleaded for a ceasefire. The United States, distracted by the fall of the Berlin Wall, issued weak protests. Assad ignored them all. By summer 1989, East Beirut looked like Stalingrad. Entire neighborhoods lay in ruins. Water and electricity were cut off for weeks at a time. An estimated 200,000 Christians fled Lebanon during the worst months of bombardment. Yet Aoun refused to surrender. His daily radio broadcasts became legendary among Lebanese Christians. "They can destroy our buildings," he declared, "but they cannot kill our dignity as Lebanese." But dignity doesn't stop artillery shells. Aoun's Christian rivals watched the destruction with growing horror. Samir Geagea, despite his bitter rivalry with Aoun, couldn't stand by while Syrian guns pulverized Christian Beirut. In a moment of desperate unity, Geagea ordered the Lebanese forces to coordinate with Aoun's army against the Syrian assault. For a brief moment in 1989, the Christians stood together. It wouldn't last. The brief Christian unity shattered in January 1990. As Syrian shells continued to fall on East Beirut, Aoun and Geagea resumed their deadly rivalry. This time, it was personal. The spark came when Geagea announced his acceptance of the Taif Agreement, the same accord that Aoun had rejected as Syrian dictation. "We must be realistic," Geagea argued. "Syria has won. Our choice is to negotiate the best terms we can or watch our community be destroyed." Aoun was furious. In his eyes, Geagea had become a collaborator. "You want to hand Lebanon over to Assad on a silver platter," Aoun accused him in a radio broadcast. "You disgrace the name of every Christian who died in this war." The war within the war began on January 30, 1990. The same day, the Chamoun family was massacred. This wasn't coincidence. Geagea's elimination of the Tigers was a message to Aoun: surrender or face the same fate. For the next 3 months, Christian East Beirut became a battlefield where brother fought brother. Aoun's army units clashed with Lebanese forces militiamen in the same neighborhoods where they had once fought side by side against Syrian occupation. The battles were intimate and vicious. These weren't distant enemies. They were neighbors, former classmates, sometimes cousins. Lebanese forces commander Fouad Malik would later write, "I was shooting at boys I had grown up with in Ashrafia. Their mothers had made me lunch. It was the most horrible thing I've ever done." International observers were horrified. "We've seen Christians fight Muslims, Muslims fight Muslims, Palestinians fight Palestinians," noted UN envoy Terje Larsen. But watching Christians massacre each other while their homeland died beneath them, this was the ultimate tragedy of Lebanon. The fighting destroyed what remained of Christian political power. While Aoun and Geagea waged their personal war, thousands more Christians fled Lebanon forever. The community that had once dominated Lebanese politics was committing suicide in the streets of Beirut. By October 1990, Michel Aoun stood almost alone. His Christian rivals had either fled or made peace with Syria. His foreign support had evaporated. Iraq was busy invading Kuwait, and France had abandoned him for better relations with Damascus. Even the Vatican urged him to surrender. Assad was ready to finish what he had started. On the morning of October 13, 1990, Syrian forces launched their final assault on Bayabda Palace. This wasn't the gradual pressure of previous months, this was total war. Syrian MiG jets screamed over East Beirut, dropping bombs on the presidential palace complex. Artillery batteries unleashed a devastating barrage that could be heard across the Mediterranean. Tank columns advanced through the suburbs, while attack helicopters provided cover. Aoun's remaining soldiers, perhaps 3,000 men, fought with desperate courage. They knew this was the end of Lebanese independence, and many chose to die rather than surrender. The battle raged for 6 hours. At 2:30 p.m., Syrian tanks smashed through the palace gates. Aoun, his uniform torn and face blackened by smoke, was found in his bunker still giving orders on the radio. "This is General Aoun," he broadcast one final time. "Long live Lebanon! Long live free Lebanon!" Minutes later, he walked out of the palace under Syrian guard and sought asylum in the French embassy. The Lebanese Civil War was over. Syrian troops immediately occupied all of East Beirut. Within hours, Hezbollah and pro-Syrian militias began settling scores with Aoun supporters. Lebanese forces units melted away, their weapons hidden for a future that might never come. Samir Geagea, now the sole surviving Christian leader, issued a statement calling for national reconciliation under Syrian protection. The man who had once commanded an army of 15,000 fighters was now begging Assad for permission to exist. In Damascus, Hafez al-Assad received the news with quiet satisfaction. After 15 years of war, Lebanon was finally completely his. The Intra-Christian War was perhaps the most tragic chapter of Lebanon's 15-year nightmare. A community that had survived Ottoman rule, French mandates, and waves of Arab nationalism finally destroyed itself in the streets of its own capital. The numbers tell the story. Between 1989 and 1990, an estimated 2,000 Lebanese Christians died fighting each other. Another 100,000 fled the country permanently. The Maronite community that had once been Lebanon's largest sect became a minority in their own homeland. Michel Aoun would remain in exile in France for 15 years, only returning after Syria's withdrawal in 2005. In a cruel twist of history, he would eventually become president of Lebanon in 2016. But by then, the Lebanon he had fought to save no longer existed. Samir Geagea survived the post-war purges, only to be arrested in 1994 and imprisoned for 11 years on charges of political assassinations. The Lebanese forces, once the most powerful Christian organization in the Middle East, became a marginalized political party. The men who tore Christian Lebanon apart both lived to see their community's complete marginalization. In the end, they had fought over the right to preside over their own people's political funeral. Next time on the Arab Archive, we'll examine how Lebanon emerged from 15 years of war, scarred, occupied, and occupied and forever changed. The guns had fallen silent, but the wounds would never heal.